Good morning to you, everybody. Hope you had a good and refreshing break. My name is Olle Stenberg. I'm representing SISP, Swedish Incubators and Science Park, and I thank you very much for getting this opportunity to present a little bit about a project that we have been running on a national basis. But since I'm new in this context, maybe I should do a little bit short introduction. My background is from a technical university, Chalmers in Gothenburg, and done some research in the academic area, but then I spent 15 years in multinational companies doing innovation works in general. And after that I had roughly the same time in starting up an incubator at Chalmers in Gothenburg and a venture fund. And since 2 years back, I'm on my own, doing some consultants work within a network called ICEA, that is Industrial Senior Advisor Group. And then I have some own investments and some own companies and startups that I work with. So it's a little bit of a mix. And I'm very happy to be here, and it's very fun to see all you participants from different parts of Europe, I must say. So, I will not have as a good practice, I will not take the train system of Sweden to present for you. I know you have been spending some time in Sala, and I hope you enjoyed that part. Maybe you can avoid that when you return back. Now, getting to this good practice, within CISP we have run a project dealing with generating local seed companies or seed funds. That is the scope or the purpose of the project was really to, first of all, get a hand of what is there around in seed funds operating close to incubators and science parks, to exchange good practice, methods and experiences. This is not really rocket science, but nevertheless it adds some value to the fund managers, to the local operators. And last but not least, to generate new investments funds, new initiatives. The project is called, in a direct translation, it's called Swedish Growth Seed, and it's financed by the Swedish Agency for Economic Growth and Regional Growth, Tillväxtverket. Now, I mean, you are all aware of this, what we call the financial gap, which is a kind of challenge for us working with startups. And I must say, when now I'm entering into startup as a CEO of one startup, actually, this is a real challenge. It is a real challenge. And in generally speaking, you have some kind of development line of a venture. This maybe starts with a technology invention or whatever in the R&D sector. And normally you have a large fraction of the financial sources coming from the public sectors. And eventually, when you get up running, you have the financial sources from the private sector, but in between there is a gap. At least in Sweden, at least in some places in Sweden. And this is one of the challenges, because it doesn't look the same everywhere. I mean, you are definitely aware of that when you exchange experiences from country to country, but I can tell you the situation here in Borlänge is quite different from the one in Stockholm or in Gothenburg, where I come from. So it is a really challenge. And then it's another challenge, that is, this is not a constant situation. This fluctuates with the business climate, right? So when the times are up and the business climate is positive, the gap tends to narrow, and it goes the other way around when the business climate is going down. So you have a great challenge to cope with this gap in general, I would say, and you have a great mission to, when I put the hat on as an entrepreneur, to really fill this gap, because it's very, very essential to fill it in order to get new companies and new jobs. So the general idea with this project is to create early stage seeds funds. And everybody who's been active in that area knows that this is a kind of mission impossible. Or as someone put it in when I worked in one of the large multinational companies, hey Olle, you know, this project, this is a strategic project. Hey, what's that, I asked. Well, it's a strategic project. What do you mean? Well, it's unprofitable. So, I mean, the basic challenge in doing investments and doing try to get this as a business model in the very early stages of financing is more or less mission impossible, you can say. There are, of course, good examples with someone who has struck the golden egg or whatever. But generally speaking, early stage seed financing suffers from quite a poor performance. But what we want to do is to narrow this gap and to attract private investors to sort of contribute with their experience, their network, and the way to do business also in the early phases, because we believe that we have seen that this makes a tremendous result and tremendous return for each individual company starting up. So the challenge, inherent challenge, is really to attract the private investors with good competence how to run and start up a business, and make it somewhat, at least, not too unprofitable to operate in that area. And also to try to find models how to work in a public and private partnership, so this gap also can be closed in some way, at least. So these are real challenges. The main parts that we made in the project is first to survey some of the existing funds. I will come back to that. And then the format was quite simple. It was like workshops that you have here, exchange and transfer good practices and ideas. But then we also sort of extracted this in a kind of handbook and a hands-on manual, how to do it. This is, of course, this is more a casebook of examples, you can say, but it's very essential to get inspiration when you try to start up a new fund, and to have a good example from somewhere else. You can actually show, hey, these guys, they succeeded in doing well in their fund, and why not start a similar thing here in Borlänge or wherever. And then we have also made some hands-on startup support with each individual prospect. So the survey was, well, trying to sort of map up the local situation of this individual seed fund. And we started out with a network of science parks and incubators. So we looked at basically around these environments to find these kind of seed funds. Try to map up, do we see any patterns, how does it look like, how do they operate, what are the main governance structures, etc. And we as I mentioned, we started out with the network from the SISP, the Swedish Incubators and Science Parks, which are more or less distributed all over Sweden, you can say. And in this network, we selected 9 seed funds that were operating. This was in 1912, yes. And totally they had something like 39 million euro committed, invested 21. These are normally very, very small funds. The size varies a lot. The smallest one was 150,000 euro. The largest was actually the one we started in Gothenburg, at Chalmers. It was almost 20,000 euro. But the normal size, you can say, ranges between 10 to 30 million Swedish crowns. So that would be like 1 to 3 million euro. In all, 112 investments, 21 exits, and 12 shutdowns. So these were the guys that were working and had accumulated experience for a number of years. The earliest fund was from the vintage was like year 2000, and then there were some others that were coming on stream later on. In the project, we worked in the format of workshops, transfer good practices. We had examples from existing seed funds. How do you do this? How do you do that? Especially focus on the start of funds. How do you actually get it going? We had a lot of inspiration from different players, from the public sector, from agencies, public funds, etc., but also national and regional financing institutions that we have in Sweden, and of course also representatives from the private sector, business angels, VCs, angel funds, family offices, crowdfunding activities, etc. Just to get inspiration and sort of getting a menu, what is around on this arena. And out of this, we extracted what you can say a kind of handbook. This is very, very hands-on. How do you start and operate a fund according to good practices and experiences in the local area? I will come back to some examples here. One is, of course, if you're going to start a new fund, that is to assess the conditions and the requisites. Is there a need for a fund? And how should it be positioned? And how should it work? What is especially important, I think, that is to get this local adaptation. Because as I said initially, it looks very different from place to place. It's not at all the same all over in Sweden. I guess you have probably a similar situation in your countries, that parts of the country are more developed, more active economically, and parts of them are not so economically developed or not so much economic activity. In the handbook, we also outlined the different sort of the scope of operation, the formal structure, also went into the details. How should you do the fundraising? Should you go for just one national entity, or how do you do it? How to get the public investors, the private investors, and actually train people how to sell their concept, sales arguments for the fund. What arguments do I, as a business angel, what do I like? What do I think is attractive? What do I dislike? What kind of, and so really coaching the sales process. Pitch training. Of course, there are lots of legal requirements in order to start a fund. And this we have to get into account: the governance, the management, investment criteria, policies, etc. This will be a long list. This is just a starting list. We will add on, if we continue the project, we will continue to add on sort of management issues and also exit issues, etc. And I think that this has been a good way to start to accumulate some kind of common knowledge in this very special area where that is extremely early phase investing. Now, okay, just to give you an example, this could be, this is a very elaborate structure and very complicated structure, maybe not the standard structure, but as you see, the investors in the fund could be, normally you have a setup of business angels, preferably experienced guys or girls that have been doing their own business, that do invest in companies and maybe like to invest in a fund as well. Private investors and also public investors, public funded. Some cases you have a management company or a management entity and a fund structure. In some cases you merge this into one structure. That is more the normal case, I would say, since these are very small entities. And then you invest in different startups. The instruments that are normal is shares versus equity, of course, but also convertible loans, and in some cases they actually work with loans as well. So it's a very mix. in this case, what we did in the project was really to support with some good examples and what to think of, checklists when you make the agreements, etc., etc. So hands-on support to start up. Another thing is when you should go for a new venture, then of course it's very important to, as I mentioned, to make the assessment of the local arena. So we designed a sort of template for assessing the local financing arena and identify the gap. Where should you position your fund and your operation? This is just an example. It's not from Sala, it's from another city, and it's in Swedish, but it's just to give you a general glimpse. You have a very, very, very diverse structure of financial sources, looking from the entrepreneur side. Most of these are public, some are private, some are banks, some are loans, some are equity, and it is from an entrepreneurial point of view, this is a jungle. And it's a jungle that is not stable. It's changing all the time, so you get really dizzy. Then on top of this, you have a lot of demands or requisites. Either you should be not started, you should be a young company, you should be a mature company, you should have this amount of employees, etc., etc. A lot of conditions that each and every financial instruments imply on the financing situation. So this we identified in the local arena and then came to the conclusion, okay, this is where we are going to position the fund and this is how we're going to market it locally in this structure. This is just to give you an example, and it's not Sala. This was actually from Karlstad, another place in Sweden here. Now, moving to the sales arguments, since we want to have private investor, we think that this is a key to get a good operation. You should try to accumulate good argument. One thing is, of course, the support structure that is connected. If you're connected to an incubator or another innovation facility, so you can sort of hook on to this facility. Another thing is to deal flow. If you can demonstrate that you have a good deal flow, for instance, in an incubator or out from a university, science park, whatever, of course, you have some competence that can manage this. Another thing is when you do investments on your own, you really are on your own and you take the whole risk yourself. If you end up in an entity with a fund, of course you can share the risk, and also you can do cherry picking. In many cases you do co-investments directly from your own pocket and together with the fund. So you use the fund as an instrument to sort of scan and to attract and also share the risk with the investment. So that is the parallel investment. And it could be a way to get board assignments. And the next bullet, the philanthropic argument, is quite efficient, I would say, because many entrepreneurs feel like, okay, I want to give back, I want to pay back, and I want maybe to see young entrepreneurs grow in my own backyard, in my own hometown or whatever. In the case of the fund we started at Chalmers University of Technology, we attracted almost 100 private investors from old alumni from the university. So they had some kind of bonding to the university. You see this bonding locally in Jönköping, in Skövde, where they just started here in Sweden. So that is actually very important. A key issue is the cost of the management cost of this kind of structure. Everybody knows that's been in a venture that early stage investment, the real killer for that is the management cost. So in some way you have to find a way to reduce or eliminate the management costs, either by subsidies or by maybe some, in some cases we have business angels that really take on, hey, I want to do this. I want to do this. I can take care of the investments. I have the experience, and we are a team of 3 guys. We know how to do this. Just put in your money and we'll run it. You can see examples of that as well. The resources of the project, well, we had a CISP internal as consultant, but mostly we worked with the fund manager in the existing fund. We had a lot of external inputs, as I mentioned, from VCs, business angel networks, national agencies, etc. The total budget was 200,000 euros. Started in 2012, ends by the end of this year. So far, 2 new funds have started this year. 6 new funds are in the startup phase right now as I speak. And we have exchanged a lot of models and good practice, and I think it is, yes, 12-day, one-day seminars. And we created this handbook of how to do the business. So some key learning points. I think the workshop model was quite efficient to transfer know-how and to get an interactive sort of mode in this project. As I mentioned, the key issue to start the fund, that is really the management costs. So you have to, as I say it, you have to get some kind of subsidies or lean on another organization or individuals that really can take on a part of that cost in order to be able to attract the private capital. And also, what is very important, you need a local champion to run this, especially in the fundraising part. So like in the case of Skövde recently started, they had a local bankman who really had a network, and he puts himself in the driver's seat, and then he could attract quite a substantial amount of money. And normally you need kind of hands-on support to get experience from other places. We've experienced a high demand for the templates, key structures and such things, and also showcases. You can bring in examples where this have actually worked, and then it's important to have examples from places that look similar to the environment where you're going to start. So if you're starting a thing here in Borlänge, you shouldn't go for an example in Gothenburg. You should take something that looks a little bit similar to this environment. Then finally, transfer to other regions. Yeah, I think this is possible to have this concept to transfer it. The general work methods, the lessons learned, I think, are to a large extent general, as I've seen it in other places in Europe. I would recommend to start with local assessments, identify business angels, identify the public finance, the ecosystem, identify the gaps, and also identify the deal flow. Do you have really the potential deal flow to start an activity? This is very essential, of course. And we also created quite a simple roadmap to start. This is very hands-on. To do the local assessment, to find the lead sponsor or the local champion, and then you move it, roll it out in a sales process, you can say, and then you get started. So it's as easy as that. Okay, that was it. Thank you.